Good morning. Well, here we are now in the 7th chapter of Hebrews, and it would be rightly categorized as the meat. The writer of Hebrews is laying out for us some things that we have probably never contemplated, never thought about. Certainly, this is true for the Hebrews, these Jews who were listening to what he had to say. And it all stems around one verse, Psalm 110:4, that the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. That verse changed it all for the writer. That verse has totally opened his eyes to the reality that Christ is superior, and that in Christ we not only have a great priest, but through Christ we leave all the other priests behind. This is really the battle. This is really the issue going on in the lives of these Hebrews. If they follow Jesus and they're ostracized from everything they've known, everything religiously, everything in that priestly sense, everything in all those sacrifices, if they follow Jesus, they're going to lose that. And they have to know that Jesus is enough and that Jesus is right. And they have to know even that it's okay according to God for them to leave those priests. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is laying out. And he's doing it through this man named Melchizedek. The one we've said is a death nail to Judaism in the sense as if you were comparing it to Christ. Christ is superior in every way. So we've talked about Melchizedek back in Genesis, how he blessed Abraham, and Abram gave him a tenth. Abraham paid a tithe. And the writer of Hebrews followed that out. He made some similarities to Christ, which we see are absolutely true. Things like Melchizedek was king and priest. Melchizedek was king of righteousness and king of Salem. Melchizedek had no genealogy, no parents that we speak of. In other words, he wasn't from Levi. That's the main point. Neither was Christ. We understand that Melchizedek has no beginning of days or end of days, so he remains a priest perpetually forever. That's a picture of Christ. We understood yesterday that Melchizedek is greater than every other priest because Levi was in the loins of his father. He was in Abraham when Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek, and Melchizedek, being greater than Abraham, blessed Abraham. So you have not only the similarities of Melchizedek to Christ, but you also have the superiority of Melchizedek to every other priest. He's bigger, he's better, he's greater. The question, however, comes in response to, is it legal for these Jews to follow this Melchizedek-type priest who we know to be Christ? Is it okay? Because the law lays it out. We've read it in Numbers. The law lays it out that God has taken the Levites to be his priest. He has taken them instead of the firstborn from every womb. The Levites will be mine. They'll be the priests. And we even see, like we said in the book of Ezra, those that came back after the exile who couldn't prove they were Levites. They were considered unclean. They were excluded from the priesthood. God wouldn't accept them. We found out early in chapter 5 of Hebrews that you have to pick a priest whom God selects because nobody takes this honor to himself. If God doesn't take him, if God doesn't pick him, then you're foolish to send that negotiator. So this was big to the Jews because they have in one hand their Old Testament that lays it out for them perfectly that their priest had to be a Levite. He had to be a descendant of Aaron. This was the one God would accept. Well, the writer of Hebrews now is laying out for them perhaps a plan or a train of thought that they've never considered. And after talking about the similarities of Melchizedek and the superiority of Melchizedek, he then got to verse 11. And this was the question we introduced yesterday. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, and by the way, that's the assumption. The assumption is that the priest can, by all intents and purposes, cause God to view you as perfect. That's what the priest was supposed to do. He was supposed to nullify the wrath against you. He was supposed to take all of the charges against you, all of your condemnation, all of your black marks on your ledger, right? And he was supposed to go before God and with a gift and with a sacrifice, with intercessory prayer, and he was supposed to negotiate how to wipe those marks off of your ledger. He was to negotiate your perfection. He was to negotiate your acceptance before God. And since no one gets before God unless they're perfect, that's exactly what that priest did. And he was supposed to do that on a daily basis as you sinned and brought your sin offerings. He was especially supposed to do that on the Day of Atonement, where they took those two goats. You remember the story. One was the scapegoat they sent away. One was the goat they sacrificed, and he took it into the Holy of Holies. And on that day, he was supposed to so appease the wrath of God that you were, at least for that moment, deemed perfect before God. Not based on your actual morality, but based on the atoning work of that priest. And that was the assumption of the people. We need the priest because the priest are what allows us to achieve perfection before God. That's the way we achieve the be holy as I am holy that the Lord requires. That priest, listen to me, is our sin insurance. That's what he is. He's our sin insurance. You buy car insurance in case you have a wreck. You buy, home insurance in case something happens to your home, life insurance for your loved ones in case you die. This was sin insurance. This was our priest. He's supposed to be our ace in the hole. He's supposed to be that one that when we blow it, he can go make it right. He comes in after the catastrophe, after the wreck. He comes in, he works his magic, he satisfies and appeases God's wrath, and he makes me square with the court once again. He is my sin insurance. That's the way they looked at their priests. Now, the writer of Hebrews says, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, that's the assumption. And then he explains, for on the basis of it, the people received the law. The basis of it? Well, on the basis of the fact that the people believed the priest could make them perfect. This is why the people agreed to the law. Think about the law for a second. The requirements, the righteousness that God demanded through the law is way up here. And not only that, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, it is explicitly spelled out that if you are not careful to obey every word of this law, what do you receive in your life? Curse. Cursed shall be in the city. Cursed shall be in the country. Cursed will be the breeding of your cattle. Cursed will be your kneading bowl, right? I mean, curse, 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 if you don't accurately and faithfully uphold all the words of this law. Now, nobody in their right mind would have signed up for an agreement like that. Why in the world would we have consented to put ourselves under that sort of requirement, that holy, righteous law, a standard which we could never fulfill, and if we broke it, we get the penalty of a curse, death, disease, rejection from the land? Who does that? Well, the writer of Hebrews says there was a thought process on behalf of these people, that they submitted to that law. They accepted that law. They signed the covenant. They came under that law with this understanding, that when they mess up, that priest can square everything between them and God. So it was on the basis that through their priest, they could maintain perfection, that they went ahead and accepted the law of God. Now, that's just the facts of the Old Testament that the writer's laying out in verse 11. If perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it, the people received the law. They received the law because they thought the priest could make them perfect. So he's saying, if the people thought the priest could make them perfect, here's the question. What further need was there for another priest? If your priest already has the ability to make you perfect before God, then what need would there ever be for another priest to show up? I mean, how are you ever going to improve it? If you've already got a priest who makes you perfect, then there would never be the need for you to get a new priest, right? I mean, that makes sense. So the writer of Hebrews says, if perfection comes through this priesthood, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? If the Levites, that Levitical priesthood from Aaron, could make you perfect, then why would you ever need a new priest? And if you would never need a new priest, then why is Psalm 110:4 there? Why does God swear and not change his mind that you will be a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek? I mean, what's the point in that? And I think the writer of Hebrews here is carrying you through his logical application as he worked through Psalm 110:4. I think as he was reading the Psalms, he came to that and asked himself all these questions. Who is Melchizedek? Why is he important? And why is God orchestrating a priest according to the order of Melchizedek and not according to the Levites? The Levites already do everything we need. Why would God ordain Melchizedek? Perhaps they don't do everything you need. Maybe you think about it that way. That's actually the point he's beginning to make. Now, for helping of understanding as we work through this meat section, because there is a lot to unravel, he asks that question in verse 11. So you look at your Bible, you see that. That's the question asked in verse 11. What need was there for this new priestly line under Melchizedek? Why did God do it? Why Psalm 110:4? That's the question. The answer, just to help you see what you're reading, the answer doesn't come until verses 18 and 19. And he gives a two-part answer. Here's the answer. On the one hand, there is a setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness, for the law made nothing perfect. One reason is because everything associated with the law and that former priesthood was weak and useless. That's one reason God set it aside. Secondly, on the other hand, verse 19, there is a bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. So he says, why would God make this promise that he's going to institute a new priestly line, a Melchizedek line? Well, there was two reasons. One is because the old priestly system and the old law that the priestly system worked under was weak and useless. Weak and useless in the sense that it could not save. It could not make you righteous. Now, you can go and read Romans chapter 7, and Paul will lay some of this out. And in fact, we may do that tomorrow because I think that's an important distinction. That the law is good, and the law is holy, and the commandment is good, but it's weak. Weak and useless in the sense of how it comes to bring salvation. The law never did that. All it could ever bring was condemnation. So the writer of Hebrews now is pointing out to you that the reason God did this is because that old system was weak, and because there is a new system which actually allows you to draw near to God. The old system never did that, did it? One thing that remains, and the writer of Hebrews will come to this in chapter 9, one thing that remains is the veil. It didn't matter how long you had the law. It didn't matter how many feasts you attended. It didn't matter how hard that priest worked. It didn't matter how, if he worked his fingers to the bone, sacrificing sheep and sacrificing goats and sacrificing bulls and leaven offering, bread offerings and wave offerings and all that stuff they would do. It didn't matter how hard he worked. You never got behind the veil, did you? You never drew near to God. In fact, no one did, except for one priest, one time a year, and not without taking blood. And it was so ineffective that he had to do it every single year. You never drew near to God under that system. That was the flaw. That was the weakness. The old covenant never made you perfect. God then is instituting a new one, a new priestly line, and as I'll show you later on in the text, which necessitates a new covenant. Because if you get rid of this priest, this Levitical priesthood, you have to get rid of this law too. Why? Because this law says it's only this priest. So you can't get rid of with one without getting rid of the other. It's just fact. And so God is instituting something new, a new priest and a new covenant, one by which we will actually draw near to God. Why did God institute Psalm 110:4? So that you could draw near to him. The old one never worked. God is doing a greater, better, new thing. So the point the writer of Hebrews is going to make is don't latch on to that old Levitical system and don't latch on to that old covenant. There's a new one. There's a better one. It's not one that we instituted. It's not one that we made up. We're not defecting. We're not leaving God. We're simply following what God has said. He has promised a new priest in Psalm 110:4. And by the way, when we get to chapter 8, a new covenant in the book of Jeremiah. God promised both, and we would be fools not to run as fast as we could to them. Let the old one go. Latch on to the new. In him, we get to draw near to God. Process that. We'll come back and talk about this more tomorrow. In the meantime, you have a great day in him.